Good evening, everyone. My name is Kathy Matuzia-Acosta, and I'm the Director of Compassionate Community Care, a registered charity based out of London, Ontario, which serves patients, Canadians all across Canada from coast to coast. And with me today, we have our co-host, Alex Schadenberg. Thanks, Alex, for introducing yourself.
Alex Schadenberg. I'm the executive director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, and very happy to be with you tonight.
Wonderful. And so today we're going to open up an opportunity for each of you to participate in our training, which is called our patient advocacy or community advocacy training. And what that means ultimately is you are going to learn how to become an advocate for yourself and also for others. Now, in our chat, I'm going to post the reference that we use, and everything you need is in that booklet. And we publish this booklet. It's available as a hard copy. If you'd like to order a copy, you can just mention that in the chat, or also you can mention at the end or send me an email, and I will send you a copy in the mail. We've had a few orders come in already today, and some others have been sent out. So if you feel like you want a hard copy, feel free to let us know, and we will forward you one in the mail. They are $20 just for printing costs and to cover that, but there's a small shipping as well. But otherwise, it's very nice and it's well put together. And ultimately, inside you'll have the patient advocacy training. And in that, you'll also have what we call Appendix A, which we'll refer to today, is the patient advocate agreement. Now, tonight's training, for those of you who have joined us, is really a sequence of trainings and what began last week, which was our Being With My Story visitors training. So if you had joined us last week, we were training our group online, just like this tonight, via Zoom, on how to be compassionate, dedicated, and friendly volunteer visitors in their communities. And so we have people coming from across Canada joining us in this effort in creating compassionate community care chapters. And what we find is it's most resourceful and effective when you have people visiting in the community. And once you start visiting, you'll notice occasionally the person you're visiting may ask you to accompany them for an in-person appointment, a medical appointment. It could be with a doctor, a specialist, and a member of the medical team. And so what we find is most effectively is when you're able to partner with that person, they are seen in a different light. They're regarded differently, and we'll talk a little bit about that today as well. But ultimately, what you're doing is learning how to be an advocate for them. You could be silent, so which means you'll just simply be sitting in the room, and you may be taking notes, which we recommend you do often, and have a notebook dedicated to that, or you may be actually participating in the conversation, meaning you could be asking questions depending on what type of relationship and what type of involvement you want to have in that appointment. And that's all determined before. So we'll touch on all of that today. And so as I begin, I'm going to share our screen here. We'll be going through the presentation, so everything you'll see is really in the book. So you don't really necessarily need to take notes, but if you feel the need to, feel free, obviously. But everything you have is in the chat on that link. You can refer to the digital version if you'd like, and you can read that on your own time, or you can follow along with us, but ultimately it's all in the book. Okay, fantastic. So ultimately, as I mentioned to you, it is important to visit. And the reason behind that is that as you learn, you grow with the person that you're meeting with, it's important to visit in the community. Why? Because as you know, many people now are becoming more and more isolated. They're becoming isolated on social media, from social communities, from their families, from their friends, potentially. We saw that during COVID. There was this strong sense of an isolation, a depression from the fact that their people were not meeting and being with one another. And so we saw is a response to the call, which is a real urgent call in Canada, is to really start visiting one another, being there in person, participating in a person's life by simply spending time with them. And what's really simple about this is how people used to interact years ago. We used to have, Joe would live, across the street. I have a number of children. I have 5 young children. And, you would have my children visiting, walking across the street. speaking and just having time with the person that they are neighbors with. And, this is something Alex, I know, grew up with, right? And other families as well. And so, what's really important about this is this culture of visiting and going back to this sense of being with one another. It's very effective, it's heartwarming, it is significant, and it makes a big impact and difference in the lives of the people you visit, especially importantly, the elderly. It may also be people who are at the stage of life. For example, a young man who often calls us and simply says he has no one. He's a recent immigrant to Canada. He lives in Toronto. He finds the city quite isolating, and so he has no friends or family and no children, and so he finds himself very lonely. And so what we're finding is it's important to go back into that ability to visit and be with one another in terms of visiting. Now, here we actually had this training, like I mentioned, which is the Being With training happened last week. We have recorded that training and it's available to you. And once it's ready, the link will be shared with you via email. Okay, so not to worry, you can always review that training from last week, which is the visitors training. Tonight, we're going to focus on empowering you so you can thereby empower others. Tonight, you're going to gain the skills and confidence to be an advocate in the healthcare system. It is a free training. Myself and Alex are going to be co-hosting it. And why ultimately we want to enable you to become an advocate is so that you're going to be having the tools. You'll be equipped with the knowledge to actually participate and be in those meetings, be it a doctor's appointment, physician, a specialist. It could be any type of discipline or medical arena, but you could actually participate or be a silent observer. Okay, perfect. Now, in terms of advocating for yourself and for others, it's an important skill. And this is an important reason why many of us are here tonight. For those of you who have actually been advocates already, great, you know what I mean. My father just recently passed away just almost a year ago, and I saw myself becoming his advocate. Not only was I a SDM, substitute decision maker, and a power of attorney, but ultimately was there along the way, along his journey as he neared end of life. And what I found was, especially though he was a very outspoken man, very bold, very self-independent, and had a good center of what he wanted, he still required some help in terms of advocacy. And it's important, especially when you learn how to advocate for yourself and others, as it's an important skill. It's necessary to inform others about your needs, your abilities, and your wishes. Advocating is a skill that can be learned and it results in empowerment. Now, why do some people need advocates? I'll let Alex take this slides over. Thank you, Alex.
Well, being an advocate, I'm going to first say that, you know, advocacy is a skill that can be learned, but it's not something that comes natural to everyone. So I'm quite clear about that. And the other thing about advocacy, which is very important, is you need to advocate for people who you know quite well. Most people who get involved with advocacy are advocating for a friend or a family member. But when you're advocating, you help them with being their voice, um, or you're being a friend. Often what's happening with this is that you're recognizing that someone has a specific need that's not being filled, and the advocate is there to make sure that that person receives the caregiving that they deserve, or how would you say, the social services. And you might be, as a prime example, if it's not a family member, you might be visiting someone, let's say in a church community who you know, and you recognize that they're not receiving the caregiving opportunities that they really need. You recognize that they really should have someone come visit them, whether that's from through social services or whatever that might be, at least a couple of hours a week, that they have some support. And you're thinking to yourself, well, I think they need an advocate to help express that to the physician, to the nurse practitioners, etc. So as an advocate, you can make a difference. I'm going to say one other thing that you're going to hear throughout this presentation. Sometimes an advocate is just someone who is there with the person, your moral support, you're there with them, and you are, how would you say, enabling them to get the care that they need just by either being there or helping them along the way. We move along. So as an advocate, you talk with the person, you support them, and you act on their behalf according to their instructions. So an advocate is not a power of attorney, and I will get into that later. An advocate is someone who is actually, you know, someone who they have agreed to allow to advocate for them. So what's happening is that whether they and let's be very clear, when someone gets older and has significant health issues, it's good to have an advocate with you. And we know that anyway intuitively because many people often go to the doctor with their elderly parents. And they're not going to the doctor with their elderly parents because they know better or whatever it is, but because they know that by being there, that helps their parent receive the care that they need. So they recognize this whole reality of the interconnectedness of the person and the value that's seen upon a person who has significant community. So anyway, when you're an advocate, you're not speaking on behalf. You're representing them. You're not speaking for them. Now, why did I say it's different than a power of attorney? We'll get into that in a minute. An advocate empowers their client by helping them to understand the systems that affect their lives, access the care that they need, and make intelligent, informed decisions. So let's give you a better example. You might be visiting somebody or might be a family member and you recognize that they simply are not receiving all the medical care that they need. They have certain health issues, and it seems to be whether the doctor, now I'm not saying doctors are bad people, but they're not receiving all the care that they need, and you're recognizing that. So you're saying, well, maybe because of their health conditions, um, the doctor isn't quite sure how to help them. So you can come in and help them by simply helping them express themselves, helping or by conversing with them ahead of time and deciding, well, what is it that I actually need, and help them achieve that. And the other reality is that you're going to see over and over again, the doctor and the nurse practitioners, these are the gatekeepers to care in our community. So there is significant, how would you say, um, controls in the system to make sure, based on costs, etc., that certain people can receive the care they need and others cannot, based upon there's only so much care available. So the doctor has to be a bit of a gatekeeper, and they know that. So sometimes being an advocate for someone and saying, well, when I visit Mrs. So and so, it's clear that she needs someone to come in a couple of days a week to help her, maybe a couple of hours a week at least, to help her bathe or do something like that. Something needs to happen because these are very distinct goals for this person. We move on. You stand up for his or her individual rights as an advocate. So you talk with this person, you're helping to represent them, you're working with them, and you're recognizing that they have individual rights that you do not think at this moment are being effectively respected. You're obtaining and maintaining opportunities. And I already sort of mentioned that, opportunities in the community. Let's say someone needs some home care, you're helping them to obtain that. They might need better medical care, and all they've been receiving is painkillers from their doctor. And the reason isn't that the doctor was a terrible person. It's just that they didn't really have someone explain to them, Mrs. So and so, this is a new problem she's having, and let's check to see if we can actually help this person. Gain access to support and disability related services. As I said, the difficulty today, and I'm not saying this is new because it's certainly been a part of our reality for a while, there's only so much access to community care supports and to be involved in this. Let me give you a very good example of this whole concept, and that is in the case of my son Pete. Peter is an autistic young man, and if it weren't for his mother, my wife Susan, helping him get the services he needs, he wouldn't be able to get them. Someone had to advocate for him. It's just a simple reality, and also to speak to their healthcare providers. We move on. What is an advocate not? Well, advocates do not provide counseling. You're there to represent the person. Obviously, you're going to be discussing issues with them, how they want you to represent them. Maybe, as I say, they just want you to be there as a moral support, and that can be of great help. But we're not counselors. No, we're there to be a support for that person. We never make decisions for another person. Remember, an advocate is there to represent that person. You're not the power of attorney. And I know it comes up again later, but I'm going to say it very quickly. The difference between a power of attorney and an advocate is an advocate is representing someone or working with somebody who is fully competent and capable of making decisions for themselves, but might need help to obtain the care that they need, or the decisions might need help to obtain these needs that they have. Whereas a power of attorney is representing you when you can't make decisions for yourself. So that's somebody you would appoint ahead of time, and they make decisions for you when you can't make decisions for yourself. We do not provide medication. No, we're not. That's your doctor, nurse practitioner, etc. You might discuss medications with somebody because there might be some concern about contraindications, and you may not have any information about it, but that might be something that gets discussed. But you're not providing medication, and certainly the other side of it is you're not also what you call a, how would you say, someone who visits you that has, how would you say, training to provide medication. You're not doing anything like that. And you're not a case manager. This is not what you're doing. You're really more of, to describe it best, most often it's a family member who's doing this for another family member or a friend who's doing this for another friend. But what you're doing is you're working with them to ensure that they get the care they need. We move on. So what does it mean to be an advocate? Well, if you took the visitor course, you'll know that this is exactly what we talked about. We need to be a good communicator. So that's not exactly everybody's strength. Now, it's something you can always work on. But the reason is that if you can't be a good communicator, then sometimes advocacy is not going to go very far for you because you're not capable of communicating. Often, an advocate is really helping that person communicate their needs. You need to be willing to ask questions. Now, when I say this, you need to be very polite, and you see this down here. You need to be a good listener. You need to be courteous and respectful at all times, and yet assertive and persistent. Now, these things start seeming like they're actually contraindications to courteous and respectful, and yet at the same time assertive and persistent. Let's be brutally understand this. We've had calls, Kathy. I've had calls where a family member is really, representing another family member in a very strong manner, and you're thinking, "Well, that's good, you have a good case here, I think I agree with what you're saying, etcetera, so it's not an issue of that," but they seem to be so assertive and so persistent that they actually become the blockage. They become this situation where the doctor or the nurse practitioner is saying, "I don't wanna deal with this person, we're just gonna block you from the care you need," and so you're getting the opposite effect. So you need to be always courteous and respectful. And I always say to people, when you're advocating for somebody, sometimes you have to be so courteous and respectful that it can be painful at times. And the reason is that your role is to help them receive the care they need. And sometimes that means you have to do so by just humbling yourself and helping that person out. You have to respect privacy. All the information that you're dealing with this individual person that you're advocating for is not it's not about you. It is about that person. Right? So you have to completely respect their privacy. If you cannot respect someone's privacy, you cannot be an advocate for them. It's that simple. It has to be done. Knowledge is power. Well, you have to communicate with this person and help them receive the care that they need. And sometimes you might have to do some research into what kind of care might be available and try and help them achieve that. And then you identify and anticipate the client's unmet needs. Now, how you do that is you have to communicate with the person you're advocating for. You have to spend time with them, have tea with them if that's what they like. I mean, a time when you're not actually visiting a doctor and you are developing that relationship, but also identifying, well, what is it that this person really needs in order to have the care or the supports that they need? And we move on. Okay, let's get legal. Well, to be an advocate, if we can turn to the next page. To be an advocate, you need to support the person, but we also have an advocacy agreement in the booklet, and the advocacy agreement is important. You cannot represent somebody if you, well, let's be clear. If you're a mother of somebody, or you're the son or the daughter of somebody, usually there won't be any issue, of course, with you visiting the doctor and other caregivers and being there with your parent or your child, etc. Let's say you have a child who has certain health issues, etc. But I mean, if you're advocating for a friend, you're going to have some sort of agreement in place. So we have a sample agreement in the booklet. Kathy could tell you what page it's on. I'm on another side here, and if you go to that sample agreement, you'll see that it asserts that you are the advocate. Okay,
Page
and
49. Sorry.
page 49. There
Yeah.
you go. Now the other thing is that you would then inform, of course, the doctor, nurse practitioner, etc., that you are advocating for them. And of course, advocacy does vary as we're getting into, as you can tell. Advocacy of a person supports and promotes that person's interests. Okay, that's what you're doing to the other person. It's exactly what you're doing. You are helping them. An advocate relationship is on its own, it carries no legal authority. On its own, there's no legal authority and is never meant to interfere with or supersede the judgment of the other. So remember, when you become an advocate, usually it means the person you're advocating for is considered competent to make decisions for themselves. Because if they're not competent, you would have no right to advocate for them. You would have to be the power of attorney for personal care to be able to advocate for them and to talk about medical issues about them, for them. I mean, the other person might, so here we have the contract and it's on page 49 and you can go through it. So let's see again. We've mentioned this already, and an advocate is someone who is helping someone achieve the care and the supports that they need. It is someone who is competent and capable of making decisions for themselves. But you might notice that they are not good at helping themselves, and maybe they are not willing to speak up. And you might notice that a lot of older people sometimes they feel that, you know, it's not good that I take up these resources. They're almost like overly humble. And yet at the same time, it's not only good that they receive resources, they deserve it. Whereas a healthcare proxy, like a power of attorney. So in Ontario, that's the power of attorney for personal care. Euthanasia Prevention Coalition does sell a power of attorney for personal care document that you can buy for $10 plus tax, so it makes it 10.50. And it will protect your life. It allows you to assign someone to make decisions for you when you can't make decisions for yourself. You can email me, or maybe Kathy will put it in the information. You can email me, or you can order it, and we'll send it to you. And that's the healthcare proxy. So what does it do is when you're incapable of making decisions for yourself, that document then goes into place. Now, let me say something to you. Anybody who's heard me speak before, you do not assign your eldest daughter to be your healthy care proxy or your eldest son unless they share your values. So often what happens is that somebody will do their will and they'll fill out the will. And most families, they will assign usually the eldest child or maybe two other eldest children to be their, you know, to be in charge of their will and their estate and even their financial proxy if they come to a point where they can't make decisions for themselves. But healthcare is a little bit different because now we're talking about your life and death. So you really do need in this case someone who shares your values. So I always say to people, only pick someone who shares your values to be your power of attorney for personal care or your healthcare proxy, because they really do have the power to make decisions. So a healthcare power of attorney and a financial power of attorney is also different. And now I mentioned that in a second ago. I said don't pick your oldest son or daughter as your healthcare power of attorney if they don't share your values. A financial power of attorney only deals with your finances and issues around maybe your maybe things you own, you know, issues that because if you become incompetent, someone has to make financial decisions for you, and they would have the power to do so. And in the case of the person who's your financial power of attorney, they might be totally different than someone you've picked for your health care. So I really do emphasize that. I can't say it enough. Do not pick someone who doesn't share your values to take care of your healthcare issues. We've gotten phone calls that, have the hair on your neck stand up because mother picked someone to be their power of attorney for healthcare in the family, the oldest daughter, the oldest son, and that person absolutely does not share the values of what the mother would have had. And then you get a second daughter or the third daughter calling you up, all upset because of what the decisions have been made for mom. And that person has the legal power to do so. So don't put yourself in that situation. Now, guardians are a little different, of course. Guardian has to do with an issue such as, let's say you have a child or somebody else who needs a guardian to how would you say, make decisions, help you out. You're underage. Often it's usually someone who's under the age of 18 who needs a guardian, etc. It can vary. These are different things again. So an advocate, once again, where you're advocating for someone who is competent to make decisions for themselves, but you're helping them achieve the goals that they need for their care, whether that be healthcare or services that they might need. We move on. Always remember that if you're an advocate, you are not authorized to make decisions for the other person, right? You're not authorized. You cannot do so. You only represent their wishes. Now, this can be a problem. Why is this a problem? You can't be an advocate also for someone who you do not agree with. I'll give you a good example. The issue of, MAID, euthanasia. If you're advocating for someone, then they say to you, "Oh, well, in this circumstance, I would want euthanasia, MAID." Well, you can talk to them all you want. You have every right as a human being to talk to them and to try and convince them that that's probably not the right idea, that you can't agree with that. But if they're going to be insistent on that, you don't want to be involved in that. So you have to say, "I'm sorry, I cannot be your advocate. I can't do that." Um, there's lots of disagreements that are minor in nature, meaning, somebody wants A and you don't really like that idea. Nonetheless, it's not really a situation that breaks the relationship. But certain things do, and you have to have these discussions with somebody because you don't want to be in a situation where you've agreed to be an advocate, and now you're in a moral quandary of saying, "I don't agree with that." We move on.
Thank you, Alex.
Advocates,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah,
You
sure.
can do the advocates code of conduct. Go ahead. You
Sure.
can do that.
Sounds good. Thanks so much. Wonderful. So when you're looking at your booklet, the one that posted in the chat, there's a link there for you so you can capture everything that we're sharing with you tonight, all in detail there. Ultimately, that booklet will share all of this. So feel free to peruse that. There's a lot of information there, but ultimately what you're seeing here is there's a advocate's code of conduct, and this is from the information that's provided by the ministry by each province. And so in Ontario, for example, this is what's coming straight out of the side of the advocate's code of conduct, okay? And these are some of the points to keep in mind. That as an advocate, you will practice with compassion and respect for the person with whom you are working. So for the patient or the friend, colleague, family member, whoever it is. You're also going to ensure that your primary commitments are to promote the health, safety, and rights of the person. You're there for their benefit and to help them. You're there to support them. You also, as an advocate, will be transparent in your work with that individual. So nothing that's not obviously unspoken or told to you in confidence should be shared. And what I recommend often is to have a notebook, a specific notebook for every person that you're advocating for. If it's for your loved one, be it a spouse or a sibling or a parent, each one has their own notebook, and that belongs to them. So if they ever were to ask you to see that booklet, you could share it with them openly, and it's only for their eyes, okay? You also, as an advocate, will maintain privacy on behalf of the person who you're being an advocate for. You also keep confidential any activities and records. So if there's financial information that's shared between a physician and the patient, and you're privy to that, you can capture that if you need to in notes in your notebook. But all of that information is completely confidential and only for that patient's eyes, for the individual that's being spoken to. Obviously, unless you're speaking to an advisor for advice. Now, in this sense, you could reflect and refer back to me or to Alex. If you have any questions about a particular concern or case, feel free to reach out to us. If there's a case of potentially abuse and you're concerned for the welfare, well-being of a person that you're representing or you're involved with, feel free to reach out to us. Again, this is confidential. We have a helpline. I will mention that at the end, but for anyone who needs any assistance with any specific concerns or matters, feel free to refer to that helpline, and I'll share that information at the end. You'll also, as an advocate, guide and assist the person in medical decision making, but at no time will you make decisions about the health or medical care or medical services on their behalf. So again, all of their information is available to them. They are going to make decisions based on the information that's given. You can help discuss it with them after the appointment, before, even during, depending on how they want that to pan out. But ultimately, you have to respect their values. They're going to make decisions concerning their own health care. You're simply there as a support and an aid. You will also respect the person's values and belief system as a foundation for the decision making. So I really want to underline that point because Alex mentioned it, and I'll reinforce it here. If you do not align with the person's and the individual's values, obviously there's reasons where you may have to actually step away because, as you know, there may be conflicts of interest when it comes to specific values that you do not believe or do not uphold. And also, I'll continue here. Part of the Health Advocates Code of Conduct, to be an effective advocate means to uphold the highest ethics and standards of practice. That means you'll practice with compassion, you'll promote their health and their safety, you'll foster the autonomy of the person with whom you're representing, you'll be transparent, obviously, We mentioned this already, so I'm going to move on to the next point. And ultimately, here, you're wanting to practice within your competency. So, what that means ultimately is that if you are being asked to respond to a certain need and you're not understanding of what that means, or for example, if it's outside of your scope, your practice, you're not a healthcare professional, and you're being asked to do something that goes over and above that role, then obviously you can't withdraw, you can't continue in that regard. Any request for services outside your expertise should be referred to someone who is equipped to provide those services. So again, there's questions around care or treatment opportunities. Feel free to give us a call. There are occasions where sometimes there could be opportunities for treatment and the aids or supports that are available in the healthcare system that you may not be aware of. So that's why it helps to have that extra advice or support from someone external. You may also, and we request that you do not accept any money or gifts. Now, the reason being that as an advocate, the relationship is tied to you being a volunteer. And so it's very beneficial for the person, but we don't want that relationship to be, tainted with the acceptance of money or gifts. So we ask you, obviously something small or, symbolic like a coffee or, whichever is fine. But we're talking about obviously something in terms of higher, greater value or something that's significant in terms of its value to the person or individual. We would refer you not to and prefer you not to accept gifts or money. We also say, in terms of the healthcare conduct, to not fulfill requests or perform obviously illegal or unethical actions. Standard, not to develop a romantic or sexual relationship with the client or someone related to the client. Obviously, understandable. Not to agree to not to agree to perform any duties without the disclosure or input needed from the client. So you're not going beyond the individual you're working as an advocate with to exercise any duties that they've asked you to go in beyond. You're also not going to discriminate due to the person's age, race, religion, culture, or ethnic background, gender, sexual orientation, or immigration status. You will also continue to further your knowledge base and skill set in order to provide your client with the best care, and in this case, support. Now, if you want a capture of what this actual um, the information that we're sharing with you, you can actually refer to this. This was a link that was taken this information from, and the resident's Bill of Rights is something that we're going to refer to next. And ultimately, what this is for every resident of any care facility, be it long-term care facility, nursing home, hospice, hospital. This is their residents' bills of rights. And in this document, it refers to a resident, meaning a person who is admitted to and living in a long-term care home. But this is something you can apply across the board, okay? In terms of the resident, every resident has a right to be treated with courtesy and respect and in a way that fully recognizes the resident's individuality and respects their dignity, to be protected from abuse, to be not to be neglected by the licensee or the staff. Now, this came obviously into question when you had cases like, systemic abuse and neglect that could have occurred. We saw cases of this even before COVID, for example. We had a seminar series that we shared with our community listeners and community within the elder abuse prevention. And what that means is we record those, they're available on our website, so feel free to refer to that so you can actually, be able to share that information with others. But ultimately, we found that even before COVID, there were some signs of abuse that happened within long-term care facilities. We had two nurses that joined us on that series seminars where they shared that in some places, some people didn't even have proper bedding in a long-term care home. They were let without, for example, one person was in their nightgown and they were left like that and they had no sheets on their bed or they had nothing underneath. And so other places or other instances where there was mold on the walls or in the washrooms, public areas. So again, this is a form of abuse as well and neglect. So needs to be, stopped and prevented. Obviously, the person needs to be protected from any abuse. So if there's awareness of that case of happening, then you obviously want to make, a definite action in order to stop and prevent that from continuing and stopping. They have the right to not be neglected by the licensee or staff. They have the right to be properly sheltered, fed, clothed, groomed, and cared for in a manner consistent with his or her needs. They have the right to live in a safe and clean environment. Hence, where there's mold, obviously that's not happening. To exercise the rights of a citizen, so being an independent citizen as well, to be told who is responsible for and who is providing the resident's care directly. And they have the right to be afforded privacy in treatment and in caring for their personal needs, to have their participation in decision-making respected, to keep and display personal possessions, pictures, furnishings in their room, subject to safety requirements and the rights of other residents. They also have the right to participate fully in the development, implementation, review, and revision of their care plan, to give or refuse consent to the development, to any treatment, care, or services for which their consent is required by law, and to be informed of the consequences or of giving or refusing consent. They have the right to participate fully in making any decision concerning any aspects of their care, including their admission, discharge, transfer to or from a long-term care home, and to obtain an independent opinion regarding any of those matters. They also have the right to have the personal health information within the meaning of the Personal Health Information Protection Act kept confidential in accordance with that act, and to have access to his or her records of personal health information, including their care plan in accordance with that act. They also have the right to receive care and assistance towards independence based on a restorative care philosophy to maximize independence to their greatest extent possible, and not to be restrained or confined, except in the limited circumstances provided for under this Act and subject to the requirements provided for under this Act. To communicate in confidence, to receive visitors of their choice, and to consult in private with any decision, with any person without interference. People who are dying or very ill have the right to have family and friends present 24 hours a day. That's in the Act. To designate a person to receive information concerning any transfer or any hospitalization of a resident, and to have that person receive that information immediately. Now, if there's concerns, they can raise those or recommend changes in policies and services on behalf of themselves or others to the following persons and organizations without interference and without fear of coercion, discrimination, or reprisal, whether directed at the resident or anyone else. Now, that starts with the Residence Council, then proceeds to the Family Council, then to the licensee. And if the licensee is a corporation, the directors and officers of the corporation or a member of the committee of the management for the home or of the board of management for the home. Then there's the staff members, government officials, and any other person inside or outside long-term care home. Every resident also has the right to form friendships and relationships and to participate in the life of the long-term care home, to have his or her lifestyle and choices respected, to participate in the residence council, to meet privately in his or her spouse with or her spouse or another person in a room that assures privacy, to assure a room with another resident according to their mutual wishes if they're sharing rooms and if appropriate accommodation is available, and to pursue social, cultural, religious, spiritual, and other interests to develop their own potential and to be given reasonable assistance by the licensee to pursue these interests and to develop their potential. They also have the right as a resident to be informed in writing of any law, rule, or policy affecting services provided to the resident and of the procedures for initiating complaints. They have the right to also manage their own financial affairs unless the resident lacks the legal capacity to do so. They have the right to be given access to protected outdoor areas in order to enjoy outdoor activity, unless the physical setting makes this impossible. And they have the right to have a friend, family member, or other person of importance to the resident attend any meeting with the licensee or the staff of the home. Now, there may be times when your client finds themselves in situations where they feel powerless and vulnerable. That's why effective advocacy is so important. They might come into that place where, for example, they feel that their property or perhaps their body or the person is being threatened. They may simply feel that they don't want to risk angering someone, people that they're worried about, they fear. They're fearing perhaps the staff would make their lives difficult. And this is particularly the case for residents in medical or long-term care facilities. And as their advocate, you can help them through these stressful situations. Now, an example of this is where I know Alex mentions this in the past, where his mother-in-law had a situation. She was in a home and some of the items in her room were missing. And she didn't want to bring it up. She didn't want to share it with staff because she was worried that, it might be impacting her in a negative way. And so when his his Alex's wife obviously approached this concern, she said, "Of course you have to mention it. This should not be happening. Your things should not be missing, and things are, being stolen from you." So when she brought it up, right, Alex will often say, this person, the person they thought was actually the person or the suspect involved in the matter, was never seen again. So the management took care of it. And that's ultimately what you want. You want to ensure that there is help available, support, and it's delivered adequately so the person feels they're being actually heard. Now, how you can help. Effective advocates should look for positive solutions to problems. In protecting the people you care for, it is easy and sometimes understandable to criticize perhaps the people, organizations, or systems involved. Always speak positively and constructively. This is something we see often. We often will get calls where people are very upset, like they're at their end, and they've reached their max or their limit, and they are not able to take in more or offer more in terms of what they're not receiving. And so it's very difficult situations. So we need to be effective advocates along the way. Now, here, how you can help, obviously, in this challenging situation is you want to be present. You want to create empowering solutions. So give them opportunities. How can you, be able to illuminate this situation and bring some relief, alleviate some of the stressors? Is there mental health support that's needed? Is it pain management? Is it treatment issues? Is it having a second opinion? We often have people who feel like they're restricted to only one doctor's decision or diagnosis. Is that the case here? Or can there be expanded opportunity or room for others? Be aware of the options. Is there someone else in terms of the care plan that you haven't referred to or you haven't actually exhausted or approached? You can obviously communicate those choices to that individual, and where needed, you can often refer to us. We have a 24-hour, 7 days a week helpline. It's a free, toll-free number, and you can reach us anytime. Now, here's some communication tips. Thanks, Alex.
Well, communication tips. Well, many of these things are you're going to notice are just sort of things that you would normally, think of what you need to do, but obviously we're just going to reinforce it. You always be polite. And I mentioned that before that sometimes you get a situation where somebody is sort of being pushed away who's attempting to advocate for someone, like it's usually often a family member, almost to be painfully polite. Be clear about your position and or the organization you represent. Always be helpful. Be patient but persistent. So what I mean is that when you're patient, you recognize that things might not happen right away, but that doesn't mean you're not persistent and you continue to ask. Sometimes, of course, most important thing is that you continue on the same direction. Decide what you're trying to communicate. Now, remember, when you're deciding what you're trying to communicate, you first have communicated with the person you're advocating for. So you've made this decision ahead of time. What do you want them to do? This is the whole thing. You're deciding ahead of time. What do we want to accomplish? If you've been misunderstood, correct and rephrase. So don't be too proud not to correct yourself or ask for, rephrasing and be clear about things with somebody. If you do not know an answer, don't say you do. Just say I don't know the answer. I'm not sure. If you do not understand a question, ask for clarification. It's better to ask for clarification than to assume something. Listen carefully to all questions. Make it very, very clear what you want them to do, and always speak slowly. These are important communication tips. Uh, so, key active listening skills. Well, we encourage. We're inquiring. Now, inquiring is quite important, actually. You find this very interesting about being an advocate. You might be inquiring about, let's say, someone has certain healthcare issues, and you're asking about it. Um, you shouldn't be afraid to ask a lot of questions about these things because, in fact, they have the answers. The doctors, nurse practitioners, they have the answers. Name the emotion. I'm feeling upset right now. Redirect at times when there's a problem. Redirect. Don't just keep focusing something. Redirect. We need to reflect on things. Sometimes we need to rephrase what we're saying, and sometimes we need to be silent. So it's important to summarize what we've discussed. Use I statements. I believe. I think this. Why am I saying that? Because now you're removing it away from any sort of judgment, concerns. You're using the I statements. It's important because it's less argumentative and it's very clear. And we validate someone. I agree with you. That is a big concern. This is very important. These are key active listening skills. These are things we work on. So, when we disagree with somebody, it's sort of important we understand that when we disagree with someone, we acknowledge so there's an impact here, and we want to look at that. I disagree with something. Why do I disagree with this? So we should focus on the present sometimes. So we've had a disagreement in the past, focus on the present. Focus on the problem at hand. Okay? Don't be sort of bringing up, well, last time, yes, there was an issue last time. I understand this. But right now, this is what we need to accomplish. This is what we need to focus on. It's interesting because, I'm not going to talk about any specific circumstance, but Kathy and I know of a situation of someone who's in the hospital who we've been doing a lot of work for. And it's very interesting because a lot of the problems from the past are what's keeping the present problem able to be solved. You know what I'm saying? Because the past is such a big issue to overcome, and you can't overcome the past because the past already happened. Do not generalize. So let's talk about specific things. If I say, oh, I don't like people who do this, this, and this, and this, well, that's a generalization, and that doesn't ever help. It just doesn't help. So we're talking about an individual person. We don't generalize. We stay very specific, and we listen. Listening. When people call, it's interesting how when they're calling with a health issue and they've got significant health issues, that sometimes all you can do is listen because there aren't a lot of answers, but the person more than anything is actually really pleased that there's actually someone who actually cares enough to listen. And obviously, you're responding to certain things because there might be certain issues that you have an ability to respond to. But I mean, even when you're going to a doctor's office with somebody, as a prime example, they might just want you there to listen. I mention that because that's often the case. Not always the case, often the case. Always be kind and compassionate. Always be kind and compassionate. We move on. I think Kathy still always likes to talk about the personality type.
Thanks,
So I'll let her.
Alex. Yes. So this is our area of where we touch on the four types of personalities, and I like to compare it to my kids. I got five kids. They're 8 and younger, and so it's nice to know kind of where I deal with my children when I'm referring to this here. And so these four are, excuse me, aggressor, contemplator, mediator, and socializer. And so for each of them, an individual you might be speaking to or working with, even if it's the healthcare professional, that individual might be more of one of these types or personalities than the others. Could be a mix of both, just like all of us, we could be a mixture of both. But it's good to keep in mind these general ideas because they'll come into play. Maybe it's a healthcare professional you're speaking to, and you're noticing that there's a certain personality that they have. How to deal with them and that personality will make a difference in terms of the outcome of what you want and ultimately the trajectory or the healthcare treatment options or what's made available and the success of obviously your meetings. The other point is it could be the person you're actually representing and you're advocating with and on their behalf. They may be a certain personality type. They might be like an aggressor and you happen to be a socializer. So it's a good pairing because you're actually a little bit more on the opposite sides of the spectrum. So it's important to kind of keep these ideas in mind and they help you in general. Most of the situations we find ourselves, you'll find one of the or more of these personality types on a daily basis, and it's good to keep these points in mind. So for an individual who happens to be an aggressor, this is an individual who often is asking the what of the question, like, what are we doing? My son Noah, he's the typical kind of personality in this regard. He's 6. He used to have long hair until recently he chopped it off. He calls himself Samson because he lost his power. But at the end of the day, the point is he stopped wanting to hear people ask him, what his gender was. And what's interesting about that is he's very self-aware, he's extremely autonomous, and he's very independent thinking. So he's quite clever. And their biggest fear is often fear of losing control. So they actually become more of the aggressor in the situation. And so when they're challenged, they end up being more on the offense. So with him, if you put him in a corner, he's going to retaliate. So it's good to kind of keep your distance and make sure that you understand. An aggressor, they often are competitive. They might be goal-oriented, right? They're demanding, they have high expectations, and they're blunt, and they're quite direct in their communication, and they make quick decisions. And so often I get feedback from his, teachers where they say, you know, he's quick, he's smart. He knows what he wants, and he can, one example, his teacher, did a good job one day, so he gave her $2. And she said, "What's this for?" And he said, "It's your tip." So they're funny. Anyways, and that tip for you to use to have to communicate with individuals like this is to be factual. You want to keep concise, actual, factual, engagement. You don't want to embellish, you don't want to exaggerate. You want to make sure you're accurate. You want to be as straightforward as possible, and you want to ask challenging questions. So, for example, what are you going to do about it? Right? You want to be bold and you want to be direct. Do not tiptoe around the issue. Use simple, direct language that educates the individual about the situation. So if you're informing a patient on the status of their loved one, or if you're speaking to them in regards to a challenging situation or dynamic, a power play, for example, you want to be direct. You want to have structured conversations with tasks, goal-oriented again, and goals for making decisions and achieving the outcome, their desired objectives. You want to have and ensure you have conversations in a timely fashion. So if someone's waiting on your response, they're not going to be happy in this category. You want to make sure you're deliberate and you respond in a timely fashion. You don't want to rush them either. So they want to be methodical and they know what's going to happen and it's outlined and it's direct, but you want to make sure you give them the time and space to make an informed judgment. You want to obviously stand your ground. So you don't want to waver. You're not a maybe person. You're A or B, but you want to be strong, especially and confident. You want to also use indisputable I messages rather than judgmental you message. So, for example, I feel we should share today with your siblings on what you received versus you should share what you got today, right? So it's just a difference of language. Remember that you do not have to agree. Again, you often will have that decision in the end, maybe to say, we're going to agree to disagree today. And you want to keep them active in the decision making. So moving them along with you and say, listen, do you see how this is benefiting the family if we respond in this regard versus if you cut everyone off and exclude them and make them allow, themselves to accept that this is in fact the right decision and give them guides that they can follow and manage on their own. The next personality is the contemplator. This is a person who's my daughter, and she asks the why questions, like why are we going to this practice or this event? Their biggest fear is criticism of their work or their ideas. So they're very much involved in their mind in thinking over things. These individuals are often meticulous, they're introverted, they're detail oriented. They can be perfectionists and they are suspicious of others. They may answer a question with a question, and they often are good problem solvers. So this type of person, what you want to do, and some tips are to lay out the problems in a detailed and orderly manner. So for example, if you are approaching a difficult challenge in the healthcare, arena or system, you want to put out what's happening, how can you relay, an effective solution, what are the options, and what is going to enable a person to receive their desired outcome. And so you want to make sure it's orderly. You want to ensure that you're truthful and forthright in your conversations. You want to give them some space to understand what's happening before you expect a response. You also want to ask them what they're thinking and feeling. So make sure you ask for feedback. Like, what do you feel about this? What are your expectations here? What are your thoughts in this regard? Do you agree with this person is saying? Show empathy when they share concerns and worries. Don't just gloss over, bulldoze over the points. Now, I know I'm a fast speaker, so often I'll just kind of move on to the next thing. So with my daughter, I have to actually stop, pause, and ask her, do you understand what we're talking about here? Did you see how that happened or how it played out? So you obviously want to show empathy. And when they share their concerns, you want to share why that happened and what can you do to help. You want to try to bring a big picture view to the discussion, which means you're looking at the horizon. You're not looking at the immediate detail, but you're bringing it out. And ultimately, you can help them better in that regard by moving them through the flow of what expected outcomes can be and what the decisions can be that will ultimately bring the greater good, what they want, or ultimately what they want to achieve. You want to use humor to bring them out of themselves, right? And their worries. So, for example, I'll bring up a humorous situation or a joke. My son, Noah, loves to crack jokes. My daughter often too will like to respond and with a funny, humorous reflection. And so they're quite happy when you bring in humor. And sometimes in a tough situation, that's the only thing you can do is, joke and say, at least you're not dead. Right? Like right now, you're still alive. Let's keep living, you know? Speak in a way
Okay,
that
yeah,
shows your,
see,
yes,
my wife's always telling me not to tell those jokes. So I don't know. But anyway, go ahead.
I know what you mean. Anyways, you want to use humor wherever you can, right? And so you want to speak in a way that shows your appreciation for this person, what they've done or what they're planning to do, and you want to affirm them, okay? This next personality is called the mediator. This is an individual who asks the how questions. For example, my son, Matthew Mateusz, and he'll often, he's a builder. He likes to build. He's often seen in the backyard. He's moving one item to the next. He's building on top. He's, canvassing different areas. He's looking at how to create something. Their biggest fear is loss of stability. And this individual are often calm, quiet. They're like the strong, quiet type. They're level-headed. They often will listen and reflect. They won't say much, and they'll let every kind of person put out their card in their discussion, and they'll hold back. And they're often great listeners. Mediators like to contemplate questions. You will not get an answer immediately. They will dislike conflict, so they will internalize and tolerate it. They will often try to keep everyone happy, often at the expense of their own happiness. And so sadly, often they get neglected. And sadly, you need to want to ensure that you're bringing open what this person is thinking and feeling so they don't get overlooked. Some tips are to show appreciation before difficult discussions. So bring up something positive. It could be something positive, then something negative if it needs to be said, and then obviously close with the positives, like a sandwich. Let them take charge of planning. They're great executors when it comes to helping plan what needs to happen. So put that in front of them and allow them to be part of that. Put discussions on the calendar. Think, plan, and then think some more sums up the mediator. Combine facts with feelings. How are their emotions coming into play here? How are they feeling about what's happened? Give them space to express their opinions before you give your take on the situation. And so what happens is, they need to have that opportunity. If they're locked out of that or they're blocked off, they will then potentially be resentful. So you want to ensure that you enable them to express their opinions. Avoid criticism and nagging. This is a point I would expand to every category, but especially for this group and this type of individual. And state the rules for the conversation at the outset. Meaning, if we're going to have a discussion, let's say it's a group, family forum discussion of everyone's who's the key player, outline who are the key players. So for example, if the children are the ones who are going to be putting in a concerted effort to take care of mom, we don't want to have too much conversation from outside forces or factors or other members of the family that are not necessarily wanting to be involved, and we don't want to have them involved. Keep some rules, right? Understand what's at stake here, what's involved, and state the rules for the conversation. Be prepared to take your time because, again, you need to explore every opportunity with a mediator and you want to ensure that they feel included. In terms of the socializer, it used to be Noah, but now it's my second youngest, who's Tobias, and he's a little social light, a little butterfly. He just moves around and happy and brings cheer to everywhere he goes. He's our little show boy, and he loves to put on a show. And so he'll often ask the who, like who's coming? Where are we going to, who are we going to see tonight? He loves social interaction. Their biggest fear is social rejection. And so these individuals are charismatic, they're enthusiastic, they are persuasive. They simply just state their opinion and that's enough. And often they side and they have the persuasion factor. They're often talkative, they're social, they're also visual and creative. They will not keep track of time well, and they enjoy being the center of attention. You'll often see him, my son, like just dancing in the middle of the room. Like he asks him to do something, he's just dancing around, that's all, which is good. He will, with this type of personality, you want to begin with a compliment. Yay, Tobias, you look great today. I really like that you chose red top, red bottom, You know how to match. You want to gently redirect the conversation from tangents. So, for example, if they want to talk about the weather or what they did last week, you want to bring them back to the conversation and be focused. They often are spontaneous, so they appreciate if you bring in some spontaneity. For example, say, "Oh, after this discussion, maybe we'll go get a coffee, or maybe we'll get you something else." Start something that will create interest, obviously, and spontaneously, go for a walk or go and make a phone call or bring someone into the conversation. They appreciate that. Start with feelings. This person enjoys speaking about how they feel, so feel free to start with the feelings. Focus on the big picture again. Save details for later. They're not very interested in that at the time. And so you want to stay and remain positive. Talk about what can go right in a situation and avoid often the negative. You want to work together on plans with this individual. It's a party with more people involved, the better. And you want to be prepared to move on quickly. So if we're going to settle on something, we're not going to go back to last week's discussion. We're going to move forward in that direction. Okay. This individual, when you're talking at the doctor's office, all of these systems in terms of this types of communication types come into play when you're actually at the advocacy table, or as you call, at the doctor's office. And so by being there, you are an important, and I would say go further, vital member to help the person understand and navigate through the healthcare system. And just by being there, simply by being present, you can affect what is being said, to whom, and how well this information is understood. I'll underscore this here. My dad, when he was being, in his meetings, he had prostate cancer, and he was diagnosed with that about 2 years before he passed away. He was entering into meetings with his specialist, his oncologist, his GP, and everyone one on one. And often he would come out and we'd ask him, Dad, what was talked about? What was discussed? What's the verdict? What's the prognosis? Nothing. He didn't know, couldn't recall specific dates and information details. So we just took it upon ourselves, his wife and myself, to go in with him and go through the appointments. Sometimes I would bring a child with me. Wow, that would make an impression. Now you have this 75-year-old man, senior man, citizen, sitting in front of the doctor specialist who's got a whole line of patients, and here he is with his wife, his daughter, and her kid, or two. Now, this is a person of significance now. It's changing the appearance of the individual just by simply having one other person, all the more if you have more. So just by being present, you can affect what's being said. You can create significance just by being there. And ultimately, you can take notes. And so that's what I often would do. I would sit in the room, take notes on my father, what was being said, what's the diagnosis, what is ultimately the outcome, and what's the desired prognosis and approach that we should be taking. A great question to ask is, to the doctor, the specialist, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? And then see and evaluate. You can actually ask questions, you can listen, you can be a support when your client or your family member, loved one, yourself, when you feel anxious or confused. Okay, thank you, Alex.
So as an advocate, what are you trying to do? Well, you're helping the medical professional understand the complete health situation of your client. So, I'm going to go here and jump up a little bit because I think it's important to recognize when we're saying this. This is actually we start with a bit of an overview and then we get into the particular. But really, what you're doing is you're helping to communicate what the person you're advocating for and yourself have realized is really what the goal of care would be for this person, and you're helping to express that. You're keeping track of old and new symptoms, problems with current treatments, or significant change to discuss with the doctor. So, for instance, Kathy mentioned taking notes, and that's what it says again in number 4 about notes. Remember, when you're taking notes, those are completely private information, complete private information. You don't own that. You're only doing it to help the person who you're advocating for. This is information that helps keep things in line. It's got nothing to do with anything but the person you're advocating for, and it should never be shared with anybody else. And managing current medications and making sure all medications and supplements are reviewed on a regular basis. That is important because medications sometimes contraindicate, and somebody might have had this health problem and then this health problem, so they've gone to the doctor for this and they received the medication for it. They went to the doctor for that and they received the medication for it. Sometimes these things contraindicate. Go together to appointments and take notes, bringing up important questions for the doctor and ensuring that critical details are not overlooked. So we move on. Well, we already mentioned this. You need to have written permission to be a healthcare advocate for your client. As I said previously, if this is a family member, such as your parent or a child or someone who, like brother, sister, someone who you're very close with, I don't think there's going to be an issue that the doctor's going to have if you're advocating for them and coming with them. But of course, if it's someone who you might know in your church group that you know really could use an advocate, let's say they've got some early stage dementia, but they're still competent and they're not seemingly getting the proper care that needs, so you're going to help them achieve that, then yes, you need written permission without a question to do this. We move on. Okay, so what are we doing to arrange? Okay, you discuss with the person what the expectations are that he or she may have with the advocate. So what are you doing? You're sitting down with them ahead of time. You're having a discussion about what it is that they are experiencing and what it is after a discussion that they should probably be trying to achieve in their, either that's medical care or services that might be provided for them. Ensure that they are willing, able, and comfortable with doing these tasks before you agree to become their advocate. um yeah, you can't be imposing this on someone that you're going to be their advocate, right? You're obviously discussing it ahead of time and there's an agreement in place and they're comfortable with that. You're also talking about whether or not you're going to speak on their behalf or at what times. You receive consent from that person. You have written permission. That's necessary before anyone can act on behalf or with another person. Also, you're going to be obtaining documents sometimes with them. And so therefore you're going to need to have written permission to do that with them. And that's important. You're discussing personal information. So that's very important. How do they want this personal information handled? It's a very important question, especially since certain personal information, they may not want you there when they're talking to the doctor about that. These are things to talk about, clarify ahead of time. You want to be an advocate. You don't want to be somebody who they are feeling, why did I make this agreement with this person? Once you both agree that you'll be the person's advocate, complete the advocacy agreement. Before your client's appointment, ask them about how they have been feeling and if anything's bothering them, especially if there's new issues. Someone might have developed some sort of back pain, or they've developed certain issues. They're having difficulty. They might have never had problems climbing the stairs before, and they're saying, "I'm losing my breath climbing the stairs." These are information bits that are very important for you to know if you're going to advocate for them. You may get more information when they're relaxed. So as I say, you sit down and have a tea with them before you ever go to the doctor's office, and you talk about it. And you think about these issues before you ever went to the doctor's office. So then when you're at the doctor's office, you have your questions and your issues already somewhat settled. You ask a few separate times. Now, if someone, let's say, has some early stage dementia, and I say early stage because obviously you're representing somebody who's competent, you might have to talk to them more than once. It's just a reality. And then they might be, it's usually when someone's feeling relaxed and you're just spending time with them that you ask them a few questions and you're working with them to help decide what is in their best interest with them, of course, with them. It's always with them. We move on. So the patient advocacy agreement, you see it here. Um, you might want to make a minor adjustment to it, but essentially it covers the information you need to know. We move on. And of course, you would share that agreement with the doctor or nurse practitioner ahead of time, so there's no shock. You don't want to show up at a doctor's office and be there with them just to be an advocate, or you might just think you're just coming just to, how would you say, be a support, and you shock them because they're thinking, who is this person? I've never seen them before. I've seen the patient before, but I've never seen this person before. So you want to make sure they know ahead of time. So before you go, the time of day for your appointment is important. Need to know the time of day. Of course, sometimes doctors do show up at the appointment late. It might never happen, but I know it's never happened to any of you before, but it could happen. The person may be better able to participate in a doctor's visit in the morning or afternoon, so you should have that discussion ahead of time. Some people sleep late, especially if they're older. They might have their day-night things sort of flipped a little bit. And then you should plan with them that doctor's visit based on what's the best time for them. You and your client should be well informed of their healthcare needs. Okay, that's obviously, as I said before, you discuss this ahead of time. You have these discussions and understand the condition and the treatments and any terms the doctor may use. Obviously speaking, when I'm saying this, if you're, I mean, most of us are not nurses, we're not doctors, we don't have medical background. You ask questions when these are questions that you don't understand or some term used or issue that you don't understand. You ask questions. We move on. This is a very small page. We ought to redo this page. Okay, review the following with your client. These points will help maintain positive, productive relationships with your client's medical provider. So, as an advocate, you and your client are partners. Doctor should listen to your concerns and answer your questions so you feel comfortable. So, this is important. The doctor should be sure that your client understands and feels comfortable with decisions regarding their health. You ask questions. So, if the doctor is making a suggestion about something or brings up a concern, it's important to ask the question. Now, Susan, and I've mentioned this many times before, Susan used to work at a health clinic, and one of the most and she worked there as the librarian. And so you might be thinking, oh, I don't want to ask too many questions, but you would have been surprised that most often the librarian was involved in going on the computer to these certain websites and printing up certain information forms. That's what they did. They would have requests for information forms, or what she would do is she would be going through different information and she'd be making sure that all that stuff is cataloged so it's easy to find for the doctor, nurse practitioner, etc. when they're looking for information. That was very easy to find for them, and that was her role to make sure that was happening. Anyway, uh, are there physical symptoms like pain or shortness of breath or feelings of being sad or worried? What's happening to this person? These are important things to discuss with the client. Is the person seeking information about medication side effects? Well, you'd be shocked how many people are having medication side effects. I think there's some improvements in that area because there's a lot more discussion around it. The other thing that's, I think, improved this whole thing about medication side effects is the role of the pharmacist. The pharmacists are being urged to review the medications you're taking. I think that's very important. Does the person want to report new symptoms or concerns? So they've identified they're having certain issues. Do they want to report it? You want to gently discuss how to talk with the doctor about sensitive issues. And I've mentioned this already. Somebody might say, if I need to talk about something about A, B, and C, I'm going to ask you to leave the room. So just please do so. And that's fine. He or she might prefer that you do not talk to the doctor. They may just want you there as a presence. That might be enough. It's the same thing when you're visiting somebody. You might be visiting somebody who you might have known for years, and now they're having certain memory issues and everything, and they might be, and you've visited them regularly. Sometimes you say hi and da da da, and they're just really just happy that you're there, and that's it, and that's good. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. You find out the person wants to have some time alone with the doctor. This is important. A good preparation involves being specific as possible what you want to achieve. So and the only reason you're being an advocate in the first place is you're recognizing ahead of time, either let's say it's a family member, you know that you want your mom to receive the best care that she can get. So you understand that, and that's why you're doing it. But if it's somebody you're visiting and you know, let's say from the church community, etc., it's because you're recognizing ahead of time this person is not receiving the services or care that they should be receiving, and you're going to help them with that in whatever ways possible. So what kind of information are you gathering? List the symptoms. Someone might have some new symptoms, so that's primarily important. There's new symptoms. List of prescriptions. Bring those medicines with you. All the medicines that they have, bring a list of them in a bag with you or on a chart with you. It's good to have them with you, and that should include herbal remedies. Why? Well, it's possible the herbal remedy also conflicts with the medication they're taking. Also supplements and other things, over-the-counter medicines. The doctor should know what that person is taking, and also, of course, what doses. The doctor should know that, but what doses are important too, because sometimes someone is reacting to too heavy a dose, or they're not getting enough response because they have too small a dose. Gather information from the visits with the doctor or specialists, and you're looking at this further. Someone might have a drug allergy. These are important issues, right? And this is another page. We have to make it bigger. We can turn it into 2 pages next time, Kathy. Look at this. And I'm getting older. Not too old yet. But anyway, we bring this information with a list of questions and topics that you want to discuss. So you've obviously had this conversation ahead of time, as I've said, over tea or coffee. And now you have your list of things that you want to discuss with the doctor. You have your notebook. I don't have to say it again, but I will say it again. That's private information. You take notes at the appointment. Why? Well, if you're dealing with someone, as I say, it's not uncommon that someone starts having memory issues. They're getting a little bit older, or maybe they're a bit nervous when they're meeting with their doctor and they can't remember everything that was said. So you're taking notes, right? And those notes just really to be to help prod the information so you remember it later and you can be reminded of, this is an issue that the doctor had specifically brought out. It also helps them understand these are decisions that the doctor had suggested. You record the date and time of every meeting. You record your discussions. So, as I said, the record of a meeting, write your in the notebook, write the speaker's name. So if you're talking to someone on the phone, you write their name of the person you talk to, title of position, phone number, etc. It's just important that you have the information. And it's not that you're going to follow up on this person and all this kind of thing. Sometimes someone might have said something that was very wrong, and you'd look at it later because then it says then now someone else is saying something different, and you'd look at it and say, "Oh, well, nurse so and so did say this on this date," and it's sort of important to know. Sometimes people will say or promise things verbally that they do not act on. I'm not even talking about now promising. Sometimes they'll say something, maybe this is the situation, etc., etc. So that creates some confusion because somebody else is saying something different. Okay. Keep a file of written responses, other documents, letters, emails. As I say, the doctors do have access to this information, and there's no reason why you shouldn't ask for it. And it's important to keep track of things in case you need them in the future, meaning before the next appointment, when you're sitting down with the person again and having tea or coffee, that you can go through some of this again. You have that information and you know what's going on. Write down your questions. And if you or your client the client become too upset to talk to someone, so let's say the doctor is giving some very bad news and it's very upsetting. Well, maybe you just write down the question and give it to the doctor. I'm not saying that that's the best way to do things. I'm saying in certain circumstances, it might be the only way that works for you, and that's fine. We move on.
Okay, so thank you, Alex. I'll jump in here with our actual day of the appointment. When you're visiting with the patient and you go in for the actual appointment, you're going to call the office to see if the doctor is on time. You can do that. You can see with their appointments if they're obviously projecting to be delayed or not. I've done this in the past. There might be 2 hours behind, 3 hours, depends on the day or their flow. You can inform the receptionist that you will be at the appointment to be a note taker, and you're going to simply be there as an advocate. You can bring a bottle of water, magazine for your client, for the person you're visiting, and in case there's an expected delay. And we know obviously there's never any delays, right? So, don't worry about that. Bring a list of medications they use or put them in a bag to take with you. This is especially important. I found this necessary to have a list always, even on my phone with my dad, particularly, but you could also write it down, and we prefer you write it down. But it's handy to have because sometimes the doctor's office would call me and say, we're about to discharge him with this new medication. Does he take currently this medication? I have to go back and refer to my list. You don't want to assume, right? Ever. Don't ever assume. This includes prescriptions as well as herbal remedies, as Alex mentioned, supplements, and other over-the-counter medications. Now, at the visit, obviously you want to be on time, so arrange to meet the individual there if you can. If it's a family member and you're driving together, obviously make arrangements how you can be there early and have a projection of time when you need to be there and when you have to leave by to make sure you ensure you're there on time. Introduce yourself as you come into the office to the doctor or the nurses if they don't know you. Respect, obviously, your client's privacy. Don't disclose more information than they've asked you to. Go to the waiting room. If the person requires a physical exam, you can wait for them outside. Let the doctor know if your client has any hearing or vision problems that make it hard to communicate with them. Now, in my family's case, my father was hard of hearing, and so he had one ear was better than the other. So I'd often remind the person he was speaking to speak to his good ear, right? Be aware of your body language. Sit up straight. Look the doctor in the eye. Take notes. Be kind, even if the doctor is not. Again, you want to be polite. Sometimes we emphasize painfully polite. If you feel upset, take a deep breath. Count to 10 before expressing yourself. It's a good strategy. This will help you to calm down. Listen. Do not move on to your next thought or retort before the doctor's finished speaking. Once they're finished, ask questions or bring up your concerns. Don't be intimidated again by the doctor. We have this tendency to feel a little bit apprehensive or intimidated by the white coat uh, or any other healthcare professionals. You're there to advocate. So you're serving a role and it's a purposeful importance. So you need to ensure that you know that you are very important. And in this meeting, your regard is for the person you're visiting and the person you're advocating for. If your client wishes to speak when the doctor asks you a question, turn towards them and ask and suggest that they answer. Obviously, let the doctor know of any changes in their client's health since the last visit. Now, we've had this issue where we've had cases where someone we've advocated for, the person is deceased, unfortunately, now, but what had happened is in the circumstances they were in that actual situation, that person never was regarded in terms of what their adverse reactions were to some medications. And that unfortunately brought on a slew of other, um, sadly, adverse reactions and health effects. And that was negative for the person. So it's important to be on top of it. The minute you're discharged, we'll talk about that soon as well, that there's any medication that needs to be realized or checked needs to happen very quickly because it can affect the person. Keep the discussion focused on problem solving. Again, bring up the point, if this was your daughter or your son or your child or your loved one, what would you do, right? Have the following answers. Have the following questions answered. How serious is the condition? Now, this is all in your book, so feel free to print certain pages if you prefer, so you can refer back to them as a handy, resource. You may want to ask, how will it impact your client's daily life? Will there be any impact? Is it chronic? Will it worsen over time? Will it go away with treatment? What causes this condition? What are their signs or symptoms to watch for? Can it worsen? Is it contagious? Don't be embarrassed about asking questions. That's your role here, and you want to fulfill on that. You're asking questions to make sure you understand the doctor's instructions and explanations, and you want to repeat in your own words what the doctor has said just to make sure you understand as well. You can also continue this discussion. How effective is the treatment? How will the medications that your client is currently taking interact with the body with any new medication? How is the medication taken? How long will your client need to take it? How much will it cost? What if there's an adverse reaction? Who do we consult and how quickly can we obtain that response? How much will it cost? Does your client's insurance, provincial or private, cover the costs? What are any side effects? Will this affect your client's ability to function independently? How long will it take for the medication to work? And are there any alternative treatments? What if they decide not to take the medication? And read up on any new medications the doctor prescribes. You can also ask for tests. What tests do you recommend? Are there more tests or further lab results that we should look at or examine? Are there x-rays, CAT scans, MRIs? How accurate is the test? When and how will the client get the results? And what happens then? Now, there are some questions. If you want to further this, ask the doctor, do they have any recommendations with respect to lifestyle factors, including diet, stress management, and exercise? Are there any organizations within the community that can help in this matter? Inquire about any services that might be offered that might be beneficial to the person. Again, remembering here that the doctor is often the gatekeeper to the variety of services the client can receive and obtain. For example, dietitian services, consulting, meals on wheels, or outings. The doctor may be able to refer you to a counselor or community agency to help. Write down all instructions given by the doctor and have them review it before you leave the office. Do not have your client sign any consent form until they understand it completely and the doctor has answered all their questions. This is important. Ask for information sheets, like Alex mentioned, that you can take home. We know there's Dr. Google, and often people refer to it, but you want to ensure that the client knows they can have access to these important information sheets straight from the source. Ask what your client should next do in terms of contacting the doctor to monitor progress. Should they wait for the results? What's the next process in this whole array of events? Determine if the treatment is working, for example, and how will they further that? Ask the doctor to do a full medication review at least once a year. Sometimes you want to do it more often. This is to ensure that the medications are working well together and they're taken at the right times in the right combinations and doses, and to check off all the medications are still needed. Sometimes medications may fall off and they're only given a time that they need to be given, and after that, they're no longer. So it's important to ensure that you understand that. Ask the pharmacist for a medication review as well. That's what they offer. After the visit, you want to ensure you make any follow-up appointments right away. So if you need a consultation, a specialist appointment, further test a result, get that done. If necessary, help your client fill any prescriptions. Ask the pharmacist for information on side effects of the medications. They may also have information sheets, so ask that for those. Discuss with your client how the meeting visit went. Consult. Hey, Alex, how did you think that went? Was that effective? Do you think I could have improved? Was it a good experience? What could have been done to make it better? Did I, obviously, the advocate asked too many questions. Did I let him speak up for himself or herself? Did they feel that they had enough time to ask the doctor their questions? And remember, a successful interaction with the healthcare system requires persistence. Okay, so this is an important point here where I mentioned this is from a chief medical officer, Dr. John White, where he quotes, it's quoted, he said, "The healthcare system can be very challenging to navigate. There are a lot of regulations that can impact your access to care, and they can be confusing. Sometimes your technique does not work the first time. You need to keep at it when accessing certain services, and you need to speak up. There's also an interesting dynamic with older adults when it comes to healthcare. They often say they do not want to bother their doctor, or they want to be a good patient. We have to help them understand that being a good patient or a good advocate for someone means getting what you need and to make sure you get quality care." Now, because there's been, we're post COVID now and the pandemic, you want to ensure that if there's other issues that arise, for example, an outbreak that may happen, we have people who work or visit places like hospices, long-term care facilities, nursing homes, so sometimes you want to occasionally monitor what the situation is. Doctors and staff will wear the personal protective equipment like masks and gloves. That may happen. Obviously, offices are often disinfected and sanitized regularly. They're set up for social distancing, so you may still see that. You might need to check in by phone if there is something that occurs or if there's some kind of necessary separation or distancing that is being done, and you may actually end up being the only patient in the office. So depending on how that, turns in terms of effect on the person in their office in the setting, you will have to answer some potential questions based on possible contact with infected individuals. And obviously, to limit yourself and your risk of getting sick, keep your hands away from your face and wash your hands often and well. Now, if you're going into advocating at the hospital, this is a recent slide that we added because as an advocate, you may find yourself advocating for someone who's in the hospital. So your primary role may be to visit simply that person, observe anything that may be happening, and advocate for what they would like based on prior discussions. You may need to inform a family member or their decision maker, if they have one, about a situation or treatment that you have observed. For example, we've had this where someone might be given some kind of medication that they're not aware of or their effect. You may want to consult and let them know that. In many cases, the person you are advocating for will be fully aware and may not need you to speak on their behalf. However, your presence should improve the psychological well-being of the patient and may speed up their recovery time. In addition, there may be and may result in better healthcare from doctors and nurses. One thing we noticed is that when my dad, had entertained visitors, we would come at different times, and that would obviously make a difference and impact on his care because, he knew that, his family's coming, he would want to be changed, right? And so when they saw us, they said, "Oh, well, most likely they're going to give more attention to Mr. Stan because his family's here, right? They don't want him to be neglected, and they don't want to, seem that they're not taking care of their patients." Now, if you're at the hospital and the patient you're seeing is at the hospital, you want to visit as much as possible. Okay, this is very encouraging. You'd be surprised how many people go to the hospital, they're admitted, they don't get any visitors. Okay, and even this from their loved ones or the family, it takes a while for them to show up. And so it's very important to visit as you can. You want to then, when you're there, monitor, of course, medication, take notes of any meds that are given, making sure they're getting the right levels of the meds, and they should be not in pain or over medicated. Also, inform hospital staff if any special needs of your client. Maybe there's dietary needs or restrictions. Maybe they're vegan or you know, they can't handle lactose. Those things need to happen and need to be specified. You can help make your client more comfortable. If they're allowed, bring some skin moisturizer, maybe lip balm, personal item like a blanket, any kind of item, family photo. Use favorite books or magazines. During their stay, you may wish to read aloud a favorite book to them. Studies have found that the median rate of medication error or unintentional medication discrepancy was nearly 50% in adult and elderly patients after hospital discharge, and nearly 20% of adult and elderly patients in studies, were reported to be affected by adverse drug events, ADEs, after hospital discharge. And again, this important point here, when your client is discharged before leaving the hospital, make sure you understand how the medication regime is different from their pre-hospitalization medications and why the changes are being made and how long they need to be ensued for. Thank you, Alex.
The issue of dementia, well, dementia is something that becomes very common as we get older, and it doesn't come immediately. It does gradually go into reality, and it gets progressively worse. So the difficulty of being in a hospital or an environment like that is if you have some dementia, is that the hospital is an unfamiliar environment, and it can be disorienting and it can be confusing. Hospitals are noisy, they're full of unfamiliar people, bright lights, reflective surfaces. Like the hospital can be quite a daunting area. I'm going to say something else because I've been in the hospital a lot lately, not with my health, but with visiting. Hospitals can be dirty. I am sorry to say it shouldn't be that way. It wasn't that way when I was young. It certainly is that way now. I'm sorry to say. Your client may not be feeling well. He or she will be touched and questioned by medical staff. So, these are interesting issues, especially with someone who has some dementia. Someone with dementia, and I say some dementia because once again, we're talking about being an advocate. So that means this person is still seen as having some level of competence, okay? If they're incompetent, then the person who's the power of attorney would be the one making decisions for them. Someone with dementia often cannot or will not accurately report symptoms or pain or things like that, and they may not remember what happened, or they need to be or why they're in the hospital. They may not remember. This could be difficult. So now you're really becoming a power of attorney almost. In this case, it's almost the power of attorney that's taking over. You might be both anyway. This can cause agitation, delirium, aggression, worsening of symptoms, and other challenging behavior. Hospital stays can bring out these behaviors. So you see, sometimes people go into the hospital and they seem to worsen while they're in the hospital because of their reaction to the whole hospital reality. We move on. As an advocate, you can help relieve these stressors. So, ask if harsh lighting can be dimmed. It's not an issue. Ask to be moved to a quieter area if possible. Sometimes someone's in a room with multiple patients, and maybe they can be moved to a different spot. Bring a simple calming activity for your client to focus on and help them to stay busy while they wait for treatment or tests. Something they may like. Maybe they like games or certain things. Maybe they like a certain book. They like something, you bring it along. Take notes if you notice expressions of pain or changes in symptoms. So if you have the notes, you can see the changes. We move on. If an older adult with no history of cognitive impairment suddenly starts having cognitive issues during or after a hospitalization, it is most likely not dementia. It's most likely delirium. And this is important because delirium is something that comes on to people often in relation to being in a hospital. Now, people with delirium often have terrifying hallucinations, delusions, and are unable to think clearly or focus. Now, the difficulty here is I'm already saying about the difference between being an advocate and being in the power of attorney. Someone having delirium might be declared to be incompetent. In older hospital patients, these symptoms can be misdiagnosed as dementia. So someone's saying, "Oh, the dementia is coming on very quick to your mom." In fact, it probably isn't dementia, it's delirium, and it's caused by something else. Some patients with delirium are agitated, combative, others are sleepy and cannot pay attention. They may show symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. It could happen at any age, delirium, but it's most common among people aged of 65 or older. And research has linked delirium to longer hospital stays, a greater risk of falls, increased risk of developing dementia, and an increased death rate. Now, what causes delirium? I think is important. Large doses, okay, delirium is more likely to develop when someone's received large doses of anti-anxiety drugs or narcotics. So that can bring on delirium. Tranquilizers used to treat anxiety, called benzodiazepines, are known to trigger or exacerbate the problem. Patients are in an intensive care. Now, the problem with intensive care is that it's often very hard actually to sleep in intensive care because of all the noise and the activity around you. And the lack of sleep often leads to delirium. The patients are then heavily sedated in this situation because they're not sleeping. They're needing to, so they're heavily sedated, and that can affect delirium. The patient's on a ventilator. Just for your information, people talk about ventilators. Ventilators are not something that people do well on for long periods of times. Ventilators are really effective when you have an immediate care need, over a long period of time, it can be very problematic to be on a ventilator. The environment is busy, noisy, brightly lit, so your sleep is constantly interrupted. Staff keeps changing. All these things lead to delirium. We move on. Warning signs of delirium: acute changes in concentration. I can't concentrate. I can't follow. You're inattentive. You have disordered thinking. You're not making sense. Disorganized speech, um, excessive drowsiness. Well, that's probably because you're not sleeping properly, or you're reacting to the drugs you're receiving and you're just not able to sleep properly. You have a disorientation, inappropriate behavior, unexplained difficulty with feeding oneself. So you're just losing your abilities, basic abilities to do things. Unexplained difficulty with mobility or movement if the person is become immobile. So this can often be related to delirium. What can you do? You need to speak to the doctor about the delirium. If it's delirium, you need to speak to the doctor and ask, can we minimize the amount of medication? Can we reduce the amount of the medication they're receiving? Because they seem to be having a very negative reaction to this medication. And if you notice the side effects, ask them to make changes immediately. Hopefully they'll listen. Ask staff to dim the lights. I wish it would be that easy, eh? Kathy, with Roger Foley's situation, just ask staff to dim the lights. Man. And turn down noisy machines. Close the door to reduce noise. Keep your client hydrated. Fluids are very important in these situations. And we mentioned in the visiting program the one thing that really changes when someone gets older is the level of fluid in their body. So it's important to recognize that people as they get older tend to have a lower fluid level in the body. So it's important to keep hydrated. Stay with your client so they have a familiar face with them. Arrange for your client to get a maximum amount of undisturbed sleep. So maybe just stay there and stay quiet and relax um, as they're sleeping. And if someone comes in and say, no, they're sleeping right now, just let them be a little bit longer. Ask doctors and nurses if their visits can be coordinated or less frequent. Have a large print clock. Now, why? Or a calendar visible. Well, it's important that a client realizes what time it is. If you're in a hospital, you often lose track of what time it is or what the day is. And so you can see if you have some delirium and if you're having these health issues and everything, how this can be a problem. Bring a family photo so they have familiar faces to look at. Whenever possible, ask your client to take short walks or practice therapy exercise. We move on. Delirium. A study by Harvard researchers found that a variety of non-drug interventions, making sure patients' sleep-wake cycles were preserved. They had their eyeglasses with them, their hearing aids with them. They were not dehydrated and reduced delirium by 53%. As a result, falls among hospitalized patients was reduced by 62%. So what are they pointing out? Proper sleep, hearing aids, eyeglasses, proper hydration really reduced delirium. We move on. Suggestions for patient advocacy: start a support group. Now, this is something Compassionate Community Care has been really promoting. Start a support group. Burnout awareness. Now, Compassionate Community Care has done this in the past. We need to do this again, where we have special Zoom seminars just for people who are doing caregiving. Keep a journal. Evaluation of appointments. Think of opportunities for enrichment. And if you've got concerns, you can contact Compassionate Community Care and speak to them about it. And I think Kathy takes over.
Yes, this is an added side. We wanted to encourage you. So if any of you interested in having a personal power of attorney document, again, each case is I'm gonna go back here. So we had questions around this on our last training last week. So if you are interested in getting that document, you can email Alex. I'll put the email in the chat. It's it's a good and important document to have, and it's a document designed to protect you when you're unable to make medical decisions for yourself. And so choosing the right power of attorney for your living will is based on your own values. It's a deeply personal process. And it's not just about picking someone you trust, it's about choosing someone who aligns with your core principles, understands your wishes, and can act confidently on your behalf when you can't. Okay. And so, being an advocate is so incredible. It's very essential, I would say, especially today's culture and in day and age where so many people are feeling isolated and kind of cut off from people. It's important to show up for people, and especially when they need you. So, if you ever are asked as a friend, family member, relative, even person in the community to be an advocate for someone, please take up that opportunity and challenge. It's really rewarding, and you'll see that as things pan out and move through the meeting, it's not as intimidating as it may appear or sound, okay?
I'm gonna say
And
something very realistic. It seems like being an advocate with the difficulty in our healthcare system today is actually becoming more difficult. So everything we've been saying, like, being assertive or be patient, be always very, very polite. These are very important things because it seems to be becoming more difficult to help somebody because the system itself seems to be in a bit of a crisis. And I don't think I'm saying anything that people are surprised by because we've all sort of experienced that in minor ways or even major ways. So being an advocate is becoming more important than ever.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Alex. We need more advocates, actually. So our next training sessions will be most likely in the new year, but please feel free. I'm going to encourage you to jump on our Being With My Story Visitors training. If you haven't had a chance to join us last week, we had that training. We did record it, so we're more than happy to share that with you. And you'll receive an email where we'll have that recording available. It's myself and Alex as well doing that training. It's a bit longer. It's about 4 hours, but we have a Q&A in that as well. And that training will give you the confidence to journey with those who are suffering, socially isolated, sick, or dying to renew their hope and purpose in life. And it's using a form of reminiscent therapy, very effective, very simple, where people are interviewed as you meet with them and you are, in fact, visiting. Those events, all of our events are actually available on our website. It's short form beingwith.org, like you're being with someone, or compassioncommunitycare.org. All of our events and emails are there, and all of our upcoming sessions are going to be listed there. Now, some things that people have done in terms of going out into the community, if you decide you want to be an advocate, it often is by referral and someone will ask you. But if you ever feel the need to, some people have asked for certificates. If you do require or want a certificate to share that for last week's training or for tonight's training, please let me know because I will issue it for you, but I just have to you just have to prompt me that you'd like one, okay? Now, this is a handy little book we created as a result of surveys that were done or you know, uh, interviews of women in our community, which is the London area. We are, of course, across Canada, but this was a collection of stories that were interviewed of women in the diocese of or area of London. And so, what's wonderful about this is over 55 ladies were interviewed by their friends, loved ones, community members, and they talk about what they've done in their life. And this can be done by any community. It could be done by your advocacy community. It could be done by your specific organization or help in your mission in order to grab, the attention of the community, draw awareness to an issue, and really emphasize the life. Questions and things that happen when a person is obviously, at a certain state or struggle or going through challenges. It's really a wonderful opportunity to capture that person's legacy. And so we would encourage you to consider making a real attempt to make the stories for yourself or even just to capture your own story. We call it the My Story, but you can call it your name, obviously. And it's a great way to be interviewed and to share your wisdom and your insights with others. Obviously, visiting makes a difference. We know this. These are some captured shots of my own family. The kids are mine, often most of them, like the individual shots. And so it's wonderful. We actually go out, myself and my family, we visit in the community. We have different centers that we visit as a group, and other families join us with their children. So this is a great opportunity for people to partake in. Again, in the communities like centers, they're looking for this. They're looking, and people want, because there's a need there to actually go and represent in your community. So please take up that opportunity if you can. These testimonies that we shared, of course, are women's stories, and they're really beautiful opportunities to show people how people live. Some of the ladies who are featured in that book that I shared with you have passed away. So now their families are asking for those books that were published in their memory to bring those to their family and bring that to the next generation. And so it's a wonderful way to bring on generativity and bring on knowledge to the next people in their community. And another way you can help, obviously, is to visit people in their homes in pairs, encourage social interaction, be a visiting or an active person in your community, take seniors to fun community events, excuse me, encourage mobility, go for walks. If there are opportunities in community events, theater shows, all of that is a wonderful opportunity for people to get out and socialize. Visit retirement residences. I've mentioned some people here are part of communities in the hospice sector, so that's wonderful. And so definitely we're going to have a follow-up care and training just on speaking with people who are caregivers and already visiting the community. So look for that in the new year. And then, of course, if you are called, feel free to form a dedicated group of visitors where you can become advocates for one another as well and remind people that they're never alone. I'm going to highlight a quick mention here about a program that is free and it's an effective way to alleviate some of that isolation that people experience when they're not able to receive an in-person visitor. We have one of our coordinators herself on us on the call today, so thank you for joining us, Suzanne. And she is actually our program coordinator for our seniors calling service. And this is an exceptional program. It's Canada-wide, so nationwide, wherein we have individuals connecting with seniors on a regular basis, regular check-ins by phone or Zoom with seniors who may not be able to receive an in-person visitor. It's for anyone who's 55 and over, and it's a wonderful opportunity to get plugged in to a senior, in your community. It could be someone across in Canada, in BC, others are local. So feel free to reach out to us if you're interested in participating as a volunteer, or if you know some seniors who might feel isolated or depressed, feeling down, and they would appreciate getting a call a regular basis. We have some seniors that are called weekly, some seniors that are called, biweekly, monthly, however frequency they prefer, we will provide. So it's a wonderful opportunity. Please share it with others. Now, on the topic of euthanasia, we've had some cases where people who are suffering after the decision of their loved one to have euthanasia. And so to respond to that call, if you know someone who may be suffering, have experienced any kind of grief, trauma, or PTSD following that decision by their loved one and who's passed away, we are hosting a opportunity for healing, and it's called Project Anna Simeon. It's co-hosted by community in Toronto, so it is going to happen in Toronto. It's on Wednesday, November 19th. We will be there, and there will be a talk given, and as well as the hospice, like it'll be hospitality involved component. So you'll have and share a meal. It is free. There'll be a talk on grieving and an opportunity for sharing and a memorial service for that person as well. So feel free to reach out to us if you're interested in joining us for that. Our confidential free phone line is a helpline. Calls are taken in anytime, and so feel free to give us a shout if you have something concerning that you would like us to respond to, or if you have someone that you can refer to our helpline. Again, it's advice and support. It's confidential and free. Help is a phone call away, and we do our best to help and serve everyone that calls us. And calls definitely pick up coming into the holidays, as you can imagine. So if you want to go out and visit and be that in-between person, that's a great opportunity now to get started. And finally, I'll conclude here. Thank you, Alex, for joining us. Here's Alex pictured in an annual run that he does. He's a runner, and so he just did that recently. And so we do our obviously we're a charitable organization, so if you feel compelled to donate, we definitely appreciate that. You will receive a tax receipt come New Year, and so you can connect with us at any of these connectors in terms of email, in terms of our website. We're also on social media, and feel free to get in touch with us if you have any concerns or questions. And please do stay in touch. We definitely want to hear from you, how you heard about tonight, and stay connected in the community and ensure that you are able to get the support you need. So I'll open up the floor. Feel free to unmute yourselves if you have any questions, or if you'd like to draw any concern or anything that you have for me or Alex. Please do. Thank you.
I was just gonna say, Kathy, that a few years ago we had the one doctor who joined us for the visitor training session, and then the advocacy training session, and he contacted us later saying how much he appreciated it, but also the fact that it was so different. As a retired doctor, he said he was used to being on the one side of the desk, being the doctor, and then when he became an advocate, he was like, it was such a totally different experience to be on the other side, being the person advocating for the patient, with the medical caregivers, etc. Now, obviously, he had an advantage because he was a doctor and he had a lot of an incredible amount of medical knowledge and experience, and obviously contacts. Nonetheless, it was a very good experience for him, as he said. And yes, those are my legs, as you see. Yes, they're fairly thin because I do a lot of running, but nonetheless.
Yes. Any questions from anyone in the group? Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. I have a question here in regards to the rights of people in homes. Is there any kind of regulation as to the rights of people in, sorry, in the general public if they are patients in the typical live-in at home healthcare setting? Is there some kind of regulation of a patient's rights? If so, where do we go when they aren't being met? Good question. Yeah. So Alex, I believe the rights of that we just shared in the training today apply to any type of residence facility. So if people are admitted as a resident within an institution, is this what you're referring to in the question? And I give some seeing here. Yeah, it's a home health care setting, right? So I believe they would all
Well,
apply.
the difficulty might be if they're in their own home and they're receiving some care in their own home. And obviously they might need someone to advocate for them in that case, because if you're in your own home, it's a private setting, not an institutional setting. But in the case of an institutional setting, it's the same rules are supposed to apply. And and I'm not saying every institution's perfect, obviously, so that could be a problem. But yeah, the difficulty might be if you're in your own home.
Yeah. My question was kind of for just like people who are still living at home, they don't have like healthcare coming in, but they're going to the doctor and they have massive health. They're like those people have any rights in terms of like what treatment they can expect, or is it kind of just what we get as a doctor?
I think that was a great question, Elizabeth, because it's very difficult when they're in their own home. They're in a situation where you really do need someone to help advocate if they need more care. And sometimes, and that's why Kathy and I kept on emphasizing, well, the doctor, the nurse practitioner, et cetera, et cetera, they're really a gatekeeper. If you can convince them that so and so really does need more care, then and they advocate for it, then it's more likely to happen. The difficulty is there is only so much care available, right? And maybe it's better in some areas than others, and that is another problem. So, for instance, my daughter-in-law, she works for one of these home healthcare agencies as a nurse, and she goes into people's homes and she helps them. But usually, it's someone who's just come out of surgery, or maybe they just had a baby, or maybe they got certain health issues, or maybe they're getting palliative care, so they might be getting palliative care at home. And so usually it's pretty specific, right? And then there's other people who are, providing more, I would just say, home-based care, but they're not nurses, and they might provide a bath once a week or something like that. But this funding model is seriously sort of problematic in many areas. And I'm acknowledging it, and I think you might be alluding that maybe you've seen it. People are not getting the care they need, and you have to really advocate hard sometimes for more care. And you have to convince them that
I,
this person needs the care more than the other person who might be getting care because they're saying we have a budget limitation here. We've only have so much available. So becomes a problem. So
I have a question. What if the family intervenes and don't want you to say anything or advocate on that behalf?
It happens.
but
Yes. Yeah, it can happen. So we often will say or recommend that we can interact with the family, and that would be helpful for the patient because obviously their needs are not being met or they're not experiencing that type of support that they might be otherwise from their indirect family. And so we often will say, if you are visiting someone, please let their family or loved ones know that you're participating in their life in that way. We often ask if you are directly connected to us in visiting. Some of our callers, for example, or visitor volunteer callers will get a reference to the person's family so that in case for some reason we've had this where someone just kind of goes off the radar and we can't get a hold of them for 4 or 5 weeks. That's happened in the past. We found out later they were in physio and rehab, so they were not available or connected. So it's a helpful way to can interact with the family. So the family gets to know you and knows that you're actually looking out for the best interest of the patient, of their loved one. And you can become more of a group instead of being us versus them.
so Jacqueline, there's another thing that connects to that. So if the person is fully competent, I actually get a bit upset when there's people who are sort of fully competent, but they've almost signed over rights to, let's say, their kids, and yet they themselves are still fully competent, and that really shouldn't be the case. And it does cause problems. So if someone's fully competent, there shouldn't be an issue of like obviously the family's always important, don't get me wrong, but it's that should be the person making their own decisions and whether or not they want, you know, help in advocacy or whether they want you visiting or whatever it might be. But when they've become incompetent, now it's a totally different situation because when we get calls, the first question we have to ask is, well, who is the person who's been assigned who has the right to make medical decisions for you? Who is that
Yeah.
person? Right? Is it you? Is it your sister? Who is it that has those rights? Because that's the person who now will make those decisions, whether you're happy about it or not. Legally speaking, they've been legally given that right to make those decisions, and that is the decision maker. And that can be problematic, but it's the reality.
Well, thank you, everyone. Is there any other questions maybe anyone has there likes to comment? Yeah, okay. I know we've gone a little bit over time tonight, so thank you all for your
Few minutes
patience.
over.
Yeah. So we thank you
Thank
for
you
your
very much.
joining us
Thank
this evening,
you.
and do stay in touch, please. Thank you, everyone.
Yes.